Have you ever left home believing it would be just another ordinary day? You wake up. You kiss your family goodbye. You grab a cup of coffee on the way to work. You make plans for dinner. You promise your children you'll be home before sunset. Now imagine that less than 10 minutes later, the building you're standing inside no longer exists. The floor beneath your feet disappears. The walls around you explode into dust. Concrete crashes from above. Darkness replaces daylight. And somewhere outside, a man calmly walks away, knowing he has just changed America forever. April 19, 1995, at exactly 9:02 that morning, one explosion ripped through the heart of Oklahoma City with such devastating force that people more than a dozen miles away believed an earthquake had struck. The blast shattered thousands of windows, flattened an entire section of a federal building, killed innocent men, women, and children, and left a nation asking one terrifying question. Who could possibly do something like this? For hours, investigators believed America had been attacked by a foreign terrorist organization. The truth was even more shocking, because the man responsible wasn't hiding overseas. He wasn't part of a secret foreign cell. He wasn't someone who had slipped across the border unnoticed. He was an American. A former U.S. Army soldier. A man who had once worn the same uniform as the people now risking their lives in the rescue effort. And before this day was over, his name would become one of the most infamous in American history. Welcome to the Midnight Archive, where history's darkest crimes, forgotten tragedies, and real-life mysteries are brought back to life through cinematic storytelling. If you're fascinated by true crime, historical investigations, and the cases that changed America forever, subscribe now and join us as we uncover one of the darkest chapters ever written in modern American history. The city of Oklahoma had awakened beneath a clear spring sky. Nothing felt unusual, The morning traffic moved exactly as it always did. Government employees hurried toward their offices. Couriers unloaded deliveries. Parents carried tiny backpacks as they walked their children into the daycare center located inside the Alfred P. Federal Building. Some children laughed as they raced through the front entrance. Others cried because they didn't want their parents to leave. Teachers smiled, reassuring anxious mothers and fathers that everything would be fine. Nobody imagined those ordinary goodbyes would become their final moments together. Inside the building, federal employees settled behind their desks. Phones began ringing. Coffee machines brewed fresh pots. Mail carts rolled through hallways. Security guards greeted familiar faces. It looked like every other Wednesday. Only a few miles away, another man was beginning his morning with a very different purpose. He had spent months preparing. Months gathering materials. Months studying chemicals, timing, explosives, and escape routes. He believed he wasn't a murderer. He believed he was sending a message. A message he thought would start a revolution. Years before that morning, he had served in the United States Army during the Gulf War. Those who knew him described him as intelligent, disciplined, and quiet. He was fascinated by weapons. Military tactics, survival, government power. Friends remembered that conversations with him often drifted toward conspiracy theories and anger against federal authorities. Two events had transformed that anger into obsession. The first occurred in 1992 at Ruby Ridge, Idaho. The second happened 1 year later near Waco, Texas. Television coverage of both confrontations filled his mind with rage. He became convinced that the federal government had become the enemy of its own citizens. Instead of seeking political change, he chose violence. He believed one massive attack would inspire others to rise against the government. Instead, it would horrify an entire nation. In the early hours of April 19th, He drove a yellow Ryder rental truck, carrying approximately 800 pounds of homemade explosives. The truck looked completely ordinary. Thousands of similar trucks traveled American highways every day. Nothing about it suggested that it carried one of the largest bombs ever detonated on American soil. As downtown Oklahoma City grew busier, the truck entered the city's streets. Drivers stopped beside it at traffic lights. Pedestrians crossed in front of it. Nobody noticed the driver. He looked completely normal, calm, focused, invisible. Just before 9 o'clock, the truck approached the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building. The driver carefully maneuvered into position along the north side of the structure. He stopped the engine. He sat motionless for several seconds, perhaps thinking, perhaps praying, perhaps simply waiting. Then he lit the fuse, stepped out, locked the door, and quietly walked away. Witnesses later recalled seeing a young man calmly crossing the street. There was no panic, no running, no hesitation. He blended into the morning crowd as though he had nowhere special to be. Exactly 2 minutes later, time stopped. The explosion erupted with unimaginable force. A blinding orange fireball consumed the front of the building. The shockwave tore through concrete, steel, and glass faster than the human mind could comprehend. The northern face of the Murrah building simply disappeared. Entire support columns failed instantly. 9 floors collapsed onto one another in seconds. Thousands of tons of concrete crashed downward. Windows exploded across downtown. Cars parked nearby were tossed like toys. The sound echoed across the city. People miles away rushed outside believing an earthquake had struck. Others believed a natural gas explosion had devastated downtown. Nobody yet imagined terrorism. Inside neighboring buildings, workers were thrown across rooms. Ceiling tiles rained down. Glass sliced through offices. Computers crashed onto floors. For several terrifying moments, nobody understood what had happened. Then the dust began to settle. Where a federal building had stood moments before, there was now a mountain of shattered concrete. The daycare center was gone. Entire offices had vanished. Steel beams twisted outward like broken bones. Smoke poured into the sky. People covered in gray dust wandered the streets in complete shock. Some staggered barefoot because the explosion had ripped away their shoes. Others screamed names into the silence. Firefighters arriving at the scene later admitted they had never witnessed destruction on such a scale. Police officers abandoned patrol cars in the middle of intersections and sprinted toward the rubble. Construction workers from nearby sites rushed over carrying crowbars and heavy equipment. Doctors leaving nearby clinics transformed sidewalks into emergency treatment areas. Everyone wanted to help. Nobody cared about titles, or uniforms, or politics. The only mission was saving lives. Rescuers climbed unstable piles of concrete, using nothing but their hands. Every movement risked another collapse. But every second mattered. Somewhere beneath the debris, people were still alive. Voices emerged from tiny pockets beneath broken floors. Children cried for their parents. Parents cried for their children. Office workers called out to rescuers they could not see. Each faint voice became a race against time. Heavy machinery couldn't immediately remove the rubble because trapped survivors might be crushed. Instead, firefighters crawled through impossibly small openings searching for signs of life. Dust filled their lungs. Concrete scraped their backs. Steel bars blocked nearly every path. Still, they kept going. Doctors treated victims on sidewalks because hospitals quickly reached capacity. Blood-covered streets once filled with mourning commuters. Citizens lined up voluntarily to donate blood before hospitals even asked. Churches opened their doors. Restaurants prepared free meals for rescue workers. Hotels offered rooms to families searching for missing loved ones. Across America, television networks interrupted regular programming. Helicopters circled above the smoking ruins. Millions watched live as rescue workers carried survivors from the wreckage. The images were almost impossible to believe. Entire sections of the building had simply ceased to exist. Desks hung suspended hundreds of feet above the ground. Concrete slabs balanced at impossible angles. The American flag still fluttered nearby. A heartbreaking reminder that this tragedy had unfolded at the very center of the nation. As rescue operations continued, investigators arrived with one urgent responsibility: determine what had happened. At first, some engineers suspected a catastrophic gas explosion. But experienced bomb technicians immediately noticed something different. The pattern of destruction pointed outward from the front of the building. The damage wasn't consistent with an accident. It looked deliberate. One investigator quietly spoke the word that nobody wanted to hear: bomb. Within hours, the entire direction of the investigation changed. If this was a bombing, who built it? Who delivered it? And where were they now? Unknown to everyone at the disaster scene. The answer to those questions was already sitting in the back of an Oklahoma Highway Patrol car. The man responsible had made one mistake, a mistake so small that it would unravel everything. The mistake seemed almost insignificant. In fact, under normal circumstances, it would have been nothing more than a routine traffic stop. Just 90 minutes after the explosion, an Oklahoma Highway Patrol trooper named Charlie Hanger was driving along Interstate 35 near Perry, Oklahoma. Traffic moved normally. Drivers continued their morning without knowing that the largest criminal investigation in America had already begun. Then Hanger noticed something unusual. A yellow 1977 Mercury Marquise was traveling north without a license plate. In Oklahoma, that was enough reason for a stop. The trooper activated his emergency lights. The driver immediately pulled onto the shoulder. Nothing about the man appeared nervous. He stepped out when instructed. He spoke calmly. He handed over identification, But as Trooper Hanger continued the encounter, he noticed something else. The man was carrying a concealed handgun. When asked whether he had a permit, the answer was no. Within minutes, the driver was arrested for carrying a concealed weapon and driving without proper vehicle registration. The process was completely routine. No one, not even the trooper, had the slightest idea who was standing in front of him. The suspect was taken to the Noble County Jail. His fingerprints were recorded. His belongings were collected. The jail staff treated him like any other prisoner arrested that day. He gave his real name, Timothy James McVeigh, while McVeigh sat quietly inside a jail cell hundreds of miles away. Investigators continued searching through the smoking ruins of the Murrah Building. The rescue operation remained the highest priority. Firefighters worked around the clock. Search dogs crawled over unstable debris. Engineers constantly evaluated whether the remaining structure might collapse again. The smell of smoke mixed with concrete dust filled the air. Every few minutes, rescuers called for complete silence. Whenever someone believed they had heard a voice beneath the rubble, every machine stopped. Every conversation ended. Hundreds of people stood perfectly still, listening. Sometimes they heard tapping. Sometimes they heard cries. Sometimes they heard nothing. Each silence became heavier than the last. Families waited behind police barricades, hoping for good news. Many clutched photographs of loved ones who had been inside the building that morning. Parents searched hospital after hospital. Some children survived with injuries. Many did not. The daycare center inside the building had been directly above the blast zone. The loss shocked the nation. News anchors struggled to maintain composure while reporting the growing death toll. Viewers across America watched rescue workers carrying tiny bodies wrapped carefully in blankets. The images became permanently etched into the country's memory. Meanwhile, investigators faced another challenge. How do you identify a bomb powerful enough to destroy an entire federal building? Forensic specialists carefully examined every piece of debris. Nothing was considered too small. Twisted metal, broken bolts, fragments of plastic, burned wiring. Everything was collected. Everything was cataloged. Every object might reveal the identity of the bomber. Then came the breakthrough. Deep inside the rubble, investigators discovered part of a truck's rear axle. The explosion had destroyed nearly everything around it. Yet, remarkably, the metal still carried a stamped serial number. Investigators immediately traced the number to its manufacturer. From there, records led them to Ryder Truck Rental. The truck had been rented only days before the bombing from Junction City, Kansas. Employees at the rental agency remembered the customer. He had introduced himself as Robert Kling. But something about the name seemed suspicious. The address he provided didn't match existing records. The identification appeared questionable. Investigators quickly realized Robert Kling didn't exist. It was an alias. Fortunately, employees remembered something far more valuable than the fake name. They remembered his face. Working with FBI sketch artists, witnesses helped create a composite drawing. The image showed a young white male with short military-style hair. Within hours, copies were distributed nationwide. Television stations interrupted programming once again. The face of America's most wanted suspect appeared on millions of screens. Tips flooded into FBI offices. Thousands of phone calls poured in. Most proved useless. But one call changed everything. A manager from the Dreamland Motel in Junction City recognized the sketch immediately. The man had stayed there shortly before renting the Ryder truck. This time, he hadn't used the name Robert Kling. He had registered under his real name, Timothy McVeigh. Investigators immediately searched national databases. Within moments, his military records appeared. Former U.S. Army, decorated Gulf War veteran, expert marksman, no significant criminal history. Then another shocking discovery emerged. Timothy McVeigh was already in custody. The FBI contacted the Noble County Jail immediately. Officials there were stunned. The quiet prisoner sitting in one of their cells wasn't just another traffic offender. He was now the prime suspect in the deadliest act of domestic terrorism in American history. Agents rushed toward Perry. Before McVeigh could be released on bond, federal authorities formally charged him. The timing was almost unbelievable. Had the traffic stop occurred only a little later? Had Trooper Hanger ignored the missing license plate? Had McVeigh managed to continue driving? The largest manhunt in American history might have unfolded very differently. Instead, the suspect had unknowingly arrested himself. As investigators questioned McVeigh, they searched for evidence connecting him to the bombing. What they discovered revealed months of careful planning. The fertilizer used in the bomb had been purchased gradually. Large barrels, industrial chemicals, detonation components, everything had been gathered piece by piece. Nothing about the purchases seemed suspicious when viewed individually. Together, they formed one of the most destructive homemade bombs ever assembled. Investigators also discovered that McVeigh had not acted entirely alone. A longtime friend named Terry Nichols quickly became another focus of the investigation. Nichols had known McVeigh since their Army days. Unlike McVeigh, Nichols lived a quiet life. He rarely attracted attention, but evidence suggested he had helped obtain bomb-making materials. Search warrants executed at his property uncovered additional explosive components, receipts, and evidence that strengthened the government's case. Another man, Michael Fortier, also entered the investigation. Although he did not participate directly in the bombing, prosecutors believed he possessed advanced knowledge of McVeigh's plan. Faced with overwhelming evidence, Fortier eventually agreed to cooperate with investigators. His testimony would become one of the most important pieces of evidence presented during the trial. According to Fortier, McVeigh had openly discussed attacking a federal building. He believed violence would spark a nationwide uprising against the government. Fortier admitted he never imagined McVeigh would actually carry out the attack. Those words haunted him for years. Back in Oklahoma City, rescue operations entered their most difficult stage. The chances of finding additional survivors decreased with every passing hour. Yet nobody wanted to stop searching. Families begged crews to continue. Firefighters refused to give up. Many rescuers worked until exhaustion forced them to rest. Some had bloodied hands from lifting concrete by hand. Others ignored injuries sustained while crawling through unstable debris. Hope became increasingly fragile. One rescue worker later described the emotional burden of hearing children's toys buried beneath the rubble. Another remembered finding family photographs scattered across destroyed offices. Simple reminders that every victim had a life beyond the statistics. By the end of the operation, the final numbers stunned the nation. 168 people had been killed. More than 600 others suffered injuries. 19 of the victims were children. Hundreds of families would never recover from the loss. The Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building could not be saved. Engineers determined the remaining structure was too dangerous. Days later, controlled demolitions completed what the bomb had begun. As thousands watched from a distance, the damaged building collapsed into a cloud of dust. For many Americans, it symbolized both unbearable loss and the beginning of a long search for justice. Across the United States, people wanted answers. How could a decorated Army veteran become the architect of such unimaginable destruction? The question dominated newspapers, television broadcasts, and conversations around dinner tables. Investigators believed the answer lay buried in Timothy McVeigh's past. Born in Lockport, New York, McVeigh had grown up in what appeared to be a fairly ordinary American family. He was described as intelligent but reserved. Friends remembered his fascination with firearms and military history from a young age. He enjoyed target shooting. He admired soldiers. When he enlisted in the United States Army, many believed he had finally found the purpose he had been searching for. During the Gulf War, McVeigh served with distinction. He earned commendations for his marksmanship and discipline. His fellow soldiers respected him. By every outward appearance, he was exactly the kind of person America wanted wearing its uniform. But when the war ended, something changed. Returning to civilian life proved difficult. McVeigh struggled to find direction. He became increasingly isolated. His distrust of the federal government intensified with every passing year. The events at Ruby Ridge in 1992 became an obsession. When federal agents attempted to arrest Randy Weaver, the confrontation ended in bloodshed. McVeigh believed the government had murdered innocent citizens. Then came the siege at Waco, Texas. For 51 days, federal agents surrounded the Branch Davidian compound. The standoff ended with a devastating fire that killed more than 70 people, including children. To most Americans, Waco was a tragedy. To Timothy McVeigh, it was proof. Proof that the government had become tyrannical. He carried newspaper clippings. He sold anti-government literature at gun shows. He spent countless hours discussing conspiracies with like-minded individuals. Yet despite his growing extremism, very few people believed he was capable of mass murder. Looking back, investigators would later realize that many warning signs had existed. but individually. None of them seemed alarming enough to predict what was coming. The bombing itself had been carefully planned. McVeigh chose April 19th for a reason. It was exactly 2 years after the final assault on the Branch Davidian compound in Waco. In his mind, the date carried symbolic meaning. He believed he was avenging those deaths. Instead, he created another national tragedy. As prosecutors prepared their case, federal investigators assembled one of the largest collections of evidence ever presented in an American courtroom. Thousands of documents, hundreds of witness statements, video recordings, receipts, chemical analyses, telephone records, rental agreements, military records, every piece fit together like a giant puzzle. The Ryder truck, the bomb components, the fake identification, the getaway vehicle, the timeline. There was no single piece of evidence that solved the case. There were hundreds. McVeigh showed little emotion during the investigation. He remained calm. Almost detached, he insisted he was a soldier fighting a war against a corrupt government. To him, the bombing was not murder. It was an act of revolution. Those words horrified the families of the victims. For them, there had been no war, only ordinary people living ordinary lives. Secretaries, police officers, military recruiters, social security employees, children attending daycare. None of them had any connection to the events at Ruby Ridge or Waco. Yet they paid the ultimate price. Because of intense publicity surrounding the bombing, the trial could not remain in Oklahoma. Federal judges feared an impartial jury would be impossible to find. The proceedings were moved to Denver, Colorado. Even there, security was extraordinary. The nation watched every development closely. When opening statements began in April 1997, survivors filled the courtroom. Some carried photographs of loved ones they had lost. Others simply wanted to look into the eyes of the man accused of destroying their lives. Over several weeks, prosecutors carefully reconstructed every step leading to April 19th. Witnesses identified McVeigh as the man who rented the Ryder truck. Experts explained how the bomb had been constructed. Forensic specialists described how tiny fragments recovered from the rubble connected directly to the rental vehicle. Michael Fortier testified about conversations he had shared with McVeigh before the attack. The evidence was overwhelming. The defense argued that investigators had reached the wrong conclusions. They questioned parts of the forensic evidence. They suggested the possibility of additional conspirators. But jurors remained focused on the facts. The serial number recovered from the axle, the rental paperwork, the eyewitness testimony, the traffic stop, each piece strengthened the government's case. On June 2, 1997, after only a relatively short period of deliberation, the jury returned. The courtroom fell silent. Timothy McVeigh was found guilty on all counts. The verdict brought relief to many families, but it did not erase their grief. Nothing could. 1 week later, jurors recommended the death penalty. The judge agreed. McVeigh became one of the few federal prisoners sentenced to execution in modern American history. Meanwhile, Terry Nichols faced his own trial. Although prosecutors argued that Nichols had assisted in preparing the bombing, evidence suggested he had not been present during the attack itself. He was convicted on conspiracy and involuntary manslaughter charges. Unlike McVeigh, Nichols received multiple life sentences without the possibility of parole. Michael Fortier, whose cooperation proved critical, received a reduced sentence in exchange for his testimony. His role remained controversial for years. Some believed he deserved harsher punishment. Others argued his cooperation helped secure justice. As appeals continued, survivors attempted to rebuild their lives. Many carried permanent physical injuries. Others suffered emotional trauma that would never fully heal. Firefighters developed post-traumatic stress. Parents struggled through birthdays, holidays, and graduations without the children they had lost. Rescue workers spoke openly about nightmares that continued years after the bombing. The city itself also faced a difficult decision. What should become of the site where the Murrah Building once stood? Rather than replacing it with another office building, community leaders chose something different. They created a memorial. Today, visitors entering the Oklahoma City National Memorial first pass through two massive bronze gates. One displays the time 9:01. The other displays 9:03. Between them lies a quiet reflecting pool. It represents the single minute that forever changed thousands of lives. Nearby stands the field of empty chairs. 168 bronze and glass chairs. Each one represents a victim. 19 of those chairs are smaller than the others. They honor the children who never came home. At night, the chairs glow softly beneath the Oklahoma sky. The silence surrounding them says more than words ever could. The survivor tree also remains. During the bombing, a large American elm stood in the parking lot across from the Murrah Building. The blast scorched its branches. Debris tore through its trunk. Many believed it would die. Instead, it survived. Today, it has become one of the most powerful symbols of resilience in American history. Its seeds have even been planted across the country as reminders that hope can survive even the darkest moments. The Oklahoma City bombing changed far more than one city. It transformed how America viewed domestic terrorism. Federal buildings across the nation increased security. Concrete barriers appeared outside government offices. Vehicle access became more restricted. Emergency response systems were improved. Bomb investigations were modernized. Intelligence agencies placed greater attention on violent extremist movements operating inside the United States. Many experts believe those changes saved lives in the years that followed. Yet, despite every new security measure, the memory of April 19, 1995 remains impossible to erase, because behind every statistic is a human story. A father who never came home. A mother whose desk remained empty forever. A firefighter who risked everything to save strangers. A teacher who shielded children. A police officer who ignored danger. Ordinary Americans who became heroes without ever expecting to be. History often remembers the names of criminals, but the true legacy of Oklahoma City belongs to the victims. To the rescuers. To the families who chose courage instead of hatred. To a city that refused to let one act of evil define its future. Nearly 3 decades later, visitors still leave flowers beside the empty chairs. Children who were not yet born when the bombing occurred now walk through the memorial, learning what happened on that clear April morning. Teachers tell the story. Parents explain the importance of compassion over anger. Survivors continue sharing their experiences so future generations never forget. Because forgetting would allow history to repeat itself. The Oklahoma City bombing was not only an attack on a building, it was an attack on ordinary life itself. On parents dropping off their children. On coworkers beginning another workday. On neighbors who believed they were safe. It proved that terrorism does not always come from distant lands. Sometimes it grows quietly within the very communities it claims to defend. And perhaps that is the most unsettling lesson of all. Evil rarely announces itself. It often looks ordinary. It smiles, it shakes hands, it blends into crowds. Until one ordinary morning, it changes history forever. On April 19, 1995, America lost 168 innocent lives, but it also witnessed extraordinary courage, compassion, and resilience. And while the scars of that day remain, so does the determination to remember every victim, honor every hero, and ensure that one of the darkest chapters in American history is never forgotten. Because history is more than dates and headlines. It is people. It is choices. And sometimes one person's choice can change a nation forever.